I was told by Madeleine Albright, the former US Secretary of State, that the way to understand the modern world is to recognise that during the Cold War, foreign policy was like steering within the narrow confines of the Panama Canal. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was like steering within the English Channel, water on all sides but land visible. Today, foreign policy is like being on the open seas, with no rules beyond the 200-mile limits and no sight of land. We in the West have spent a decade chasing and ultimately killing Osama bin Laden. After the tragic and terrible events of 9/11, I don't see there was any alternative to our determination in 2001 to drive the Taliban from Kabul. The commitment and capability of Al-Qaeda to wage global jihad was, and although diminished, remains a new and serious kind of threat. The decade since has been the most traumatic for the West since the 1930s, not mainly because of Al-Qaeda, but because of profound economic, political, military and even moral challenges. Now, as the 10th anniversary of 9/11 approaches, we need to ask ourselves how to draw a line under it and move on, because the rest of the world has moved on. In the 10 years since 9/11, the combined GDP, national income, of Brazil, Russia, India and China rose from 8% of the global economy to 18%. Anglo-Saxon capitalism had its biggest crash since the 1930s. This was the decade when internet access went global, from just 360 million people to more than 2 billion people today, when a civilian surge for freedom finally hit the Middle East, as millions of Muslims turned for inspiration to democratic governance, not global jihad. So what do we do? First, we need to reassert diplomacy's place in international politics. Richard Holbrooke, the late US statesman who was Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, once said to me that America since 9/11 has suffered a, quote, militarization of diplomacy, unquote. We now need the opposite, because military might will not tackle the security threats we face. Second, we need to rethink our notions of balance of power, because they no longer concern the relationships just between states, but also between peoples. That's why I talk about coalitions of consent. As the Arab Spring has shown, the free flow of information means that future coalitions need to be based on the consent of the people, for example in the villages and valleys of Afghanistan and Pakistan, not just at the macro level in terms of relations between nation states. Third, we're entering an era of resource scarcity. The rise in non-oil commodity prices over the last 10 years has been greater than the rise during the Second World War. If you think the blame game in Europe over Greece is bad, just wait for arguments about who's causing drought and food price inflation. To tackle this, we need something else. We need, fourthly, to rediscover the joys of multilateralism and shared sovereignty. Multilateralism is not a recipe for global governance or the end of the nation state. It is a global insurance policy against the abuse of power by any state. Our problem today is not that the European Union and other multilateral institutions for handling our problems are too strong, it's that they're too weak. Regional institutions in the Arab world, Africa, Latin America, East Asia need to grow up fast. Over the past 3 centuries, there have been 3 systems of international order: economic and military domination, a balance of power, and shared sovereignty. They can coexist, as they more or less did in the years after 1945 in various parts of the world. But today, America, the hegemonic power after the Second World War, is on the back foot, economically and militarily. New powers like China and India are rising, but they're not yet risen. Europe, where shared sovereignty has been embraced, is struggling to solve its own problems, never mind becoming a global player. The result is disorder, the image of the open seas. Only this time it's made more giddy and disorienting by the stunning asymmetries of the past 10 years, when the trusted metrics of who had power and influence seems to have been inverted. A non-state actor, Al-Qaeda, sent the world's most powerful state into convulsions. Power has shifted from strong states to connected citizens, whether exposing state violence in Syria or organising millions in Tahrir Square. These are the factors that give people the feeling that no one is in charge. This is even more destabilising at a time when the world's states and peoples are more intertwined than ever before, as ideas, information, finance, migration, problems flow ever more seamlessly across borders. The British politician Norman Angell argued in 1908 in a book called The Great Illusion that it was a 19th century myth to believe that military expansion brought economic security. He hoped that economic growth in the 20th century would bring military security. In fact, both doctrines miss out the key ingredient of civil society, politics, and that's what we need to rebuild today locally, nationally and internationally.